Hello. Welcome. If you enjoy these stories, please check that you are following, and drop a comment where you're listening from. It's a small way to contribute and tell the algorithm to recommend my stories to more people like you. There are two dark shapes standing bolt upright on the white ice at the very bottom of the world. And a man is walking straight toward them, in no particular hurry, because he has decided they must be penguins. He isn't blind. He isn't a fool. He has simply been down here so long, under the same 4 hours of low sun, day after day after day, that he no longer recognizes a pair of human beings. It is the 12th of October, 1903. A headland of black rock juts out from Vega Island into the frozen sea. And on the map the men are carrying, this place has a name. They call it Cape Dreyfus. 2 of them are coming across the ice behind a sledge of Greenland dogs. One is walking in front of the team, breaking the trail. The other, a Norwegian named Jonasson, is watching the shoreline where it rises high and precipitous out of the pack. They pass the cape, and Jonasson speaks. "What's that strange thing there close by the land?" The man in front glances that way. "Yes, it looks like men," he says. "But it can't be, of course. I suppose it is some penguins." And he continues to march onwards. But Jonasson isn't satisfied. "Hadn't we better stay?" he says, "so that you can see what it is?" So the man looks a third time, and of a certainty they do look strange. He takes out his field glass. Now, cut. To the other side of that same stretch of ice, at that same instant, here there is a second little party, stopped to prepare their dinner. Groups of seals lie scattered across the floe, and the men have just walked past a couple of them without a second thought. Then one of them points at something small and dark, far away toward the channel. "What the deuce can those seals be standing up there bolt upright?" "They are moving," cries another. A delirious eagerness seizes them. A field glass is pulled out, and then the shout goes up. The same word twice. "It's men! It's men!" One of them, a man named Deuce, fires off a couple of pistol shots into the cold air, and the 2 of them snap on their skis and race to cut off the little party moving past them in the distance. Back across the ice, the first man still has his glass to his eye. His hand trembles a little as he lifts it, and it trembles still more when the first look convinces him that it really is men that he sees. He doesn't stop to count them, doesn't stop to see whether they are 2 or 3 or what they have with them. He just turns the sledge and hurries shoreward at a run. Behind him, Jonasson calls out something about the revolver, whether they oughtn't take it out just to be prepared. The dogs catch sight of the strangers and shy violently to one side. And what is it at last that he sees before him? 2 men, black as soot from top to toe, black clothes, black faces, high black caps, and their eyes hidden behind peculiar wooden frames, fitted to the face so closely that they look like black silk masks with slits cut for the eyes. They hold out their hands. And in the purest English, one of them says heartily, "How do you do?" "Thanks," the man answers. "How are you?" "Have you heard anything of the boat?" "No, neither have we." A pause. He puzzles his brains and gets nowhere. These are men of his own expedition. He is sure of that much, and yet they know nothing of the ship. He knows he ought to ask who they are. He can't quite bring himself to. Then one of the soot-black figures tilts his head. "Don't you know who I am?" And the man looks at him, this friend of his standing an arm's length away on the ice, and says quite honestly, "No, it's not very easy to recognize you." To understand how a man ends up on an ice field, failing to recognize the faces of his own friends, we have to go back. Welcome, Nightlings. This is Huxley. If you like listening or falling asleep to real stories that will reveal life's deeper truths, then this is the place for you. Consider subscribing and let the next story find you when you need it most. We are close towards a milestone for this little channel, 500 followers. It is not much, I know, but it is progress, and I cannot get there without your help. So, if you have thoroughly enjoyed one of my episodes, share it with a friend who needs it. Follow if you have not. It matters more than it should. Thank you. Now, find your softest pillow. Find the warm edge of the blanket. Let your shoulders drop. And let's begin. There are men who invent their own ambitions, and there are men who inherit them. Otto Nordenskjöld was born into his. He came into the world on the 6th of December, 1869, at Hässleby, in the eastern woods of Sweden, the son of a colonel in a house of soldiers rather than scholars. But the family carried a name, and the name carried ice. His uncle was Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld, the man who had forced the Northeast Passage in the ship Vega, the man who had come home to torchlight processions, the most famous Swede alive. To be a Nordenskjöld in those years was to belong to the polar regions before you had ever seen them. It was a name that already meant the cold, and Otto grew up inside it. So he did the sensible thing, which was to become worthy of it. He went to Uppsala and took his doctorate in geology in 1894 at the age of 24. And then, for the better part of a decade, he trained. Patagonia, down at the raw southern tip of South America, Alaska, and the Klondike, and in 1900, Greenland, where he sailed, in his own plain words, to learn how to organize a polar expedition. Think about that for a moment. A grown man, already a doctor, sailing off to the ice not to conquer anything, but to practice. He was quietly and methodically getting himself ready. Ready for what, though? That's the thing about a man with a polar name and no pole of his own. The great gaps were closing, but there was one door still open. Back in 1895, the geographers of the world had met in London and resolved that the far south needed proper science. The British would take one sector, the Germans another. Between them lay a stretch of the map nobody had claimed, and that was the gap the Swedes could step into. What made it real was a rumor of old wood. A Norwegian whaling captain named Carl Anton Larsen had come back from the edge of Antarctica with fossil plant remains he'd picked up on a bare little scrap called Seymour Island. Proof in Otto's mind that this frozen place had once been warm and green and alive. A man in Uppsala read about it, and he could not let it go. But wanting to go and being able to go are two different things. And this is where the story turns human. He could not get the government to pay for it. So he paid for it himself, scraping together private money, commercial money, and in the end, a large personal loan. He went into debt. To use the most famous polar name in Sweden, he had to mortgage himself. And even that wasn't enough. To raise a little more, he rented out his own ship to another expedition for a season, which forced him to delay his own departure. And he let his crew hunt seals and whales along the way to help cover the cost of getting south. The most illustrious name in the country, and its owner was counting coins. The ship he bought for it had a history all her own. She had been born in 1871 at Drammen in Norway, christened Cap Nor, a 3-masted bark with a little 45 horsepower steam engine tucked below for when the wind failed. She had put the first human beings ashore on the Antarctic mainland back in 1895. 6 men stepping onto the continent at Cape Adare, and a few years later, she had gone north into the Arctic ice on a sadder errand, searching for the lost balloonists of the Andrée expedition. Men who had floated off toward the pole and never come back. She had spent her life hunting for the missing in the ice. She was renamed the Antarctic, and the last thing Otto Nordenskjöld did, before he pointed her south, was to hire the one man who had already been where he most wanted to go. The whaler. The man whose old fossil wood had started the whole dream. He hired Larsen to take him there. The Antarctic left the port of Gothenburg on the 16th of October, 1901. It is a very long way from Sweden to the bottom of the world. And the first thing the sea does to a ship on that voyage is take the newness off her. By November, they had reached the equator, and the crossing left its mark on the men in the most literal way. Down in the belly of the ship, in the coal hold, they shoveled and hauled by the hour to feed her engine. And when they came back up into the light, they were scarcely recognizable. Faces, hands, clothes, all of it blackened, smeared, filthy with coal dust and soot. Nordenskjöld looked at his own men and thought that hardly a friend from home would have known them. Then he thought no more about it, and the ship pressed on. In the middle of December, they put in at Buenos Aires, and here the expedition gained something it needed, and something it hadn't asked for. Argentina offered them supplies, food, fuel, a helping hand, but on a condition. They were to carry an Argentine naval officer south with them, a young ensign named José María Sobral, and he was to be a full member of the wintering party. It wasn't cruelty. It was ordinary diplomacy, the sort of arrangement that gets made in port offices all over the world. But it meant that the price of Argentina's coal paid in flesh, was a boy of 21. Sobral was the only Argentine aboard. He was the only man who spoke Spanish. A boy of 21, bound for a wooden house full of Swedes and Norwegians. There had been another meeting too, weeks earlier, before they ever reached the tropics. Passing through London, Nordenskjöld had been sought out by a Scot, William Spears Bruce, who was planning a Scottish expedition to the very same far south. Bruce had come down to the city especially to meet him, and Nordenskjöld was touched by it. The two men found they had so many points of common interest that it seemed only sensible to reach an understanding. And Nordenskjöld set down in plain and practical words exactly what he hoped for from it. He wrote that he was very anxious that in the case of his party meeting with any accident, they should be able to calculate upon having Mr. Bruce's cooperation in their rescue when he came out a year later to the tracts where they had their field of operations. That was all. Two colleagues, over a handshake in London, agreeing to look out for one another in a part of the world where almost nobody went. Bruce would be a year behind him, in the same cold waters. If anything went wrong, the Scot would come. It was a tidy, reasonable piece of expedition business, and both men shook hands and thought no more of it than that. As for the captain was a story in himself. Carl Anton Larsen had been born in Norway in 1860 and gone to sea at the age of 9, in a small bark, alongside his father. He'd wanted to train as an officer, but money got in the way, and so, before he ever stood on a bridge as master, he had worked as a ship's cook. He taught himself English, he taught himself Spanish, and by the time Nordenskjöld found him, he had already sailed further into the southern ice than almost any man breathing. A cook who became a captain, and then the captain who would carry a whole expedition to the pole of the map. There's a certain justice in that, if you like your justice quiet. They ran south with the world's news in the hold. The newspapers they'd carried aboard were full of the Boer War, still burning away in South Africa. And they gathered the last of their people as they went, until one evening the whole strange company of them was camped around a fire in Tierra del Fuego, at the ragged end of the Americas, with their supper boiling over the flames. Nordenskjöld watched two of them lying on the ground close together. A young Norwegian seaman named Vennersgaard, and one of the local owner people, a man called Modesto. And they were talking. Or rather, Vennersgaard was asking questions in the purest Norwegian, and Modesto was answering with long, unhurried rigmaroles in his own harsh and unfamiliar tongue, and not one word of it crossed between them. It went on like that until the sheer absurdity of it got the better of them both. And then the droll titter of the Indian mingled with the ringing laugh of the youthful Northman. Two young men from two ends of the earth, laughing at a joke that neither of them could translate. The fire cracked. Somewhere out in the dark, the sea worked at the shingle. And in the morning they would go on, south, with a borrowed boy aboard who was the condition of their fuel, and a captain who used to be a cook. At last the ice let them in, and Otto Nordenskjöld went looking for the thing he had come 10,000 miles to find. He found, at first, almost nothing. The first landing was on Seymour Island, that same bare scrap where Larsen's fossils had come from years before. Nordenskjöld went ashore as the first geologist ever to gather fossils in Antarctica, which ought to have been a triumph, and came back with a pocketful of badly preserved bivalves and a lump or two of petrified wood. He was disappointed. This was the great deposit? This was what had pulled him from the far side of the planet. He climbed back aboard and looked for somewhere to make his home. So he rounded the northern point of Seymour and coasted on past it south along the channel. And there, a little way off, he came upon a small triangular piece of land beside the sea. He went ashore, and this time the ground gave him a gift. Ammonites, the coiled stone shells of creatures dead. 100 million years, and never before found anywhere in Antarctica. You can imagine the delight of it. A serious grown man, a doctor of geology, crouched on the shingle at the bottom of the world, and positively thrilled by a fossil snail. He'd found his beds, and on the spot, in an afternoon, he decided, here, this is where we build. There were good reasons, and he weighed them like the careful man he was. The little island was low and easy to land supplies on. It had firm rock to bolt a house to, and it sat ringed about by hills and ice walls that would surely shelter it from the worst of the southern storms. It seemed, in every practical respect, the sensible choice. So the sensible choice was made. They put up the house they had carried all this way in pieces. A prefabricated Swedish cottage, shipped in flat-packed sections from the other end of the world, and bolted together on Antarctic rock. When it stood about 25 square meters. About the size of a small one-car garage. 6 men were going to live in it, through what Nordenskjöld planned as a single winter. Before the ship left them, there was one errand to run. They forced through the ice to a headland on Seymour, where, in keeping with the understanding he'd reached with Bruce, they were to build a cairn, a pile of stones with a signal post, and seal up inside it a written note of where they were and what they meant to do next. A stack of rock on an empty cape with a message tucked in it, addressed to a Scotsman who was a year behind them somewhere in the same white ocean. Then they turned back to the house. On the 21st of February, 1902, the Antarctic raised her sail and stood away to the north, exactly on schedule, exactly as planned. There was nothing dramatic in it. A ship leaving on the appointed day is the most ordinary thing in the world. 6 men stood on their small triangle of land and watched her go. Then they turned around and looked at their house. Now, here is the part that surprises people. Because when you picture 6 men sealed into a garage-sized box at the bottom of the world for a winter, you picture misery. And it wasn't. Oh, the place did its best to make it miserable. The storms came, and they came for days at a stretch. Wind hissing against the wooden walls without pause. The fine dry snow finding every seam and nail hole. and drifting through in thin, ghostly threads. A storm tore the little magnetic observatory apart. Dogs died out in the weather. And one day, in June, a gale simply picked up one of their 2 boats and flung it away and smashed it. It was cold in the honest, dangerous way. The base that stands near that spot today averages 21 below through the winter. And 1902, if anything, was colder still. Inside the hut there was a peculiarity that never quite left them. The warm air rose and the cold air pooled, so that between the floor and the ceiling of that one small room there hung a difference of 20 degrees. Their feet froze while their heads sweated. They lived all winter in a vertical climate, and they kept it warm the only way the place allowed. A stove fed on coal and on blubber, on seal fat rendered down and burning. It threw off heat and it threw off soot endlessly, a fine dark grease that settled on everything it could reach. So the men and their house began, very slowly, to change colour. Not black, not all at once. Grey. The walls went grey, and the ceiling, and the shelves, and the men themselves went grey along with the room, at the same rate, in the same shade, as though the hut were quietly absorbing them. In the mornings there was another gift waiting on the wall by your head, your own breath from the night, frozen there as a rime of frost, so that you woke beside a thin white record of your own sleeping. And yet, listen to the man himself writing of those months. During the day, he says, he lay in his berth and read. They lived very harmoniously together, and conversation could be heard going on in every corner of the house. Read that again, and feel the size of the room it describes. A house so small that a conversation in any corner of it filled the whole of it. 6 men, a stove, a wall of books, and talk in every corner. For they had brought a fine library, donated out of goodwill by the publishers of Sweden, and they had brought their own stubborn good cheer. When the calendar offered a holiday, they kept it. And when the calendar offered none, well then, Nordenskjöld tells us, they very often made occasion for one anyway. A little punch, a little ceremony, an evening set apart from the others. He was almost defensive about the drink, later in print, imagining some sober critic back home clucking over how much punch these men got through. Those people, he wrote, should first try to understand what it means to live a life like theirs, before they judge the small comforts of an evening at the end of a working day. He was standing up for his men against critics who did not yet exist. That, too, is a kind of love. The strangest thing was how far away the world became. They had a stack of old newspapers aboard, and they read them and reread them until they knew the contents nearly by heart. And still, somehow, the news never quite reached them. It began to seem, Nordenskjöld says, as though these chronicles were something outside and foreign to them. Wars, elections, the doings of kings, all of it thinning into rumor, into a story about a planet they used to live on. There was one man in that warm and harmonious room for whom it was not so simple. the Argentine Sobral. According to the polar historian Ursula Rack, who has read his diaries, the Swedes seem to have failed, quietly and without malice, to fully take him in. Something in his class, his manner, the southern cut of his clothes, marked him always a little apart. And it was Nordenskjöld himself who became the boy's anchor, sitting with him, even teaching him Swedish word by word. Though Rack notes, he remained unequal in their eyes. Picture it. A house so small that talk filled every corner of it, and one young man in that house for whom every corner was in a language he was still learning. He turned 22 that April, indoors among them. The loneliest place in the world is sometimes a warm room full of friends. But mostly, it was good. That is the truth of that first winter. And it matters that you believe it before the rest of the story arrives. They worked. They read. They kept their invented holidays. They let the outer world dim to a foreign rumor. And it was, on the whole, a fine and companionable time. Nordenskjöld took a particular pride in one small fact about it, and he set it down plainly. What with all the work that rested upon them, and what with their rich supply of reading, they were never obliged this winter to take refuge in card-playing or other such ways of passing the time. When the spring came, Otto Nordenskjöld did the thing scientists do, which is go and look. And on the 28th of April 1902, 6 weeks after he had bolted his house to the rock, he sledged back across to Seymour Island, that same bare scrap he had once dismissed, and this time the ground opened its hand. Cretaceous fossils, an abundance of them. Shells and bones out of a warm dead ocean, exactly the deposit he had crossed the planet to find. And here it was lying about in the open, on the very island he had rounded and coasted past and decided against. He turned the specimens over in his cold fingers and understood quite clearly and without any drama that the station should have been placed here instead. There was nothing to be done about it. The house was built. The house was on the other island, across the ice, a decision made in one confident afternoon, and now poured in stone and lumber and 20 months of intended winter. So he collected his fossils, and he went home to the wrong house, and from the window of the wrong house, he could see across the sound the right one. He would eat there, and sleep there, and do good work there, with the better island in plain view the whole time. That was the shape of it now, not a wound, a view. He kept working. In the southern spring, he set out on the great journey of the whole expedition, south down the Oscar II coast. 3 men and 2 sledges, some of the load on the dogs, and some of it hauled by their own shoulders. Roughly 400 miles, 600-odd kilometers, in 33 days. It was the longest sledge journey anyone had yet made on that continent, and one of the first to be properly recorded, though nobody much remembers it now. Sobral went with him, the young Argentine, hauling his share of the sledge across a continent that did not know his name, the outsider from the warm north, out on the ice earning a place among men who would never quite give him one. And Jonasson, the Norwegian dog driver, They crossed country stitched through with crevasses, those hidden splits in a glacier where a skin of snow lies over a drop of 100 feet or more, and looks exactly like the safe ground on either side of it. Nordenskjöld went through one moment the surface, the next the empty blue mouth of it, opening under him, and only some mercy of rope and timing between him and the bottom of it. He came out. He got up. They went on. That is nearly the whole of what the record says, and it is enough. They were on full rations the entire way, and every man of them came home about 5 pounds lighter. Think about that. Not starving. Fed properly and daily, and the cold simply reached in and spent them anyway. 5 pounds a man, burned off into the Antarctic air. There is no thermometer reading that tells you the temperature the way that number does. And the gear they did it in was, by the standard of any later age, almost tender in its simplicity. Their boots were finnesko, soft lap footwear, and you did not waterproof them because nothing on Earth in 1902 could be made both warm and waterproof. Instead, you packed them with sennegrass, dried sedge, hay essentially, which drew the sweat out of your foot. And every single night, this was the ritual. You pulled the damp grass out of your boots, and you dried it against your own body while you slept. And in the morning, you stuffed it back in, and your life depended on your doing this correctly, because you were always wet. Not from the weather, from yourself. Your own body damped the wool from the inside, and a man who could not manage his own perspiration in that cold could lose his feet, and then rather more than his feet. The great enemy was not the blizzard. The great enemy was your own warmth, turning to water, turning to ice against your skin. Back home at the station near the start of December, the fossil hunting went on. Short trips to Seymour, a bone here, a bone there. And on the 3rd of December, Nordenskjöld came back up onto a flat tableland at the north of the island and gathered a pocketful of scrappy vertebrate fragments, odds and ends of old stone, and carried them home to the grey hut to be identified. Now, in that hut there was a doctor, Erik Ekelöf, physician and bacteriologist, the man you'd want if your tooth went bad at the bottom of the world. And it was Ekelöf, not the geologist, who picked up one of these scraps and turned it over in the lamplight, the way a man might turn over a coin to check the year. He looked at it for a moment, and he mentioned in roughly the tone you'd use to identify a sparrow on a fence, that this was a bird. A bird. All right, fine. A soot-grey room, a doctor being handed rocks by his boss, and the verdict comes back, bird. And then the size of it arrived. Because the bird this bone belonged to had stood about 6 feet tall. A penguin, the height of a man, walking this same shore 10 and 20 million years before, back when the fossils in the wall had been a warm green forest, and this whole frozen coast had been somewhere you might have wanted to live. The bottom of the world had, very casually over supper, handed a soot-blackened little house, a monster. and the house, being professional, had noted it down and gone back to its soup. They had a summer ahead of them, and a plan for it, the plainest plan in the world. In November, the ice would break up, and the ship would come back for them, exactly as she had left, exactly on schedule. That was the whole of it. That was what everyone knew. But the ice did not break up in November, nor in December, nor in January. And by the time it had not broken up in February either. The men at Snow Hill had already quietly stopped expecting it to. There was no single terrible morning. That is the thing to understand about it. There was no catastrophe, no crack of doom, nobody bursting through the door with the news. There was only a walk. One of them would climb the low hill behind the station, as men had been doing all along, and look out at the sound and see the same close pack ice stretching away, unbroken, to the edge of sight. And then he would come back down the hill and into the hut and say nothing that hadn't been said. And the fate of it settled over them like the frost settled over everything else. Slowly, without a sound. They had, in truth, accepted their probable fate since about January, when a look from a nearby hill had shown them nothing but ice all round. That is what the sameness does. It never attacks. It has no drama in it at all. It simply declines to change. The same low 4 hours of sun crawling along the horizon, the same grey light at the same hour, the same view from the same hill, day after day after day, until one afternoon you realize you have stopped waiting, and you cannot quite say when that happened. The dread of a second winter did not arrive. It accumulated, and it sat down in the room with them, a thing that had not yet happened, taking up space by the stove. And the work went on around it, which is perhaps the strangest part. They did not stop being scientists. The meteorological readings were taken, on the hour, on the schedule, written down in the ledger in a neat hand. The temperature, the pressure, the wind. A careful record of the weather, kept faithfully for a ship that was not coming. There is a particular kind of steadiness in that. To keep measuring the world precisely while the world declines to change, and to write the numbers down anyway. It was the work, more than anything, that held them. The same work that had kept the cards in the box the first winter. They filled the days with it, and the days took the filling, and gave nothing back. Early February, they went and did the necessary ugly work of getting ready for it. Nordenskjöld took Ekelöf and Jonassen back over to Seymour, to the nearest penguin colony, and for about a week the three of them killed. Some 400 Adelie penguins in that week, and 30 seals, for meat, yes, but also for fuel, because the fat of the animals was what they burned to stay alive and to see by. It was not, by every account, the killing itself that got into Nordenskjöld. It was the ease of it. The Adelie penguin had no fear of a human being whatsoever. It had never learned to. So the birds did not flee him. They walked up to him, curious, unbothered, tame as anything, and that, the accounts say, sickened him to his core, because the thing that made it easy was the very thing that made it unbearable. They came to him, and he killed them, and they kept coming. And then he carried them home and burned their fat, and the smoke of them settled on the walls with all the other smoke thickening the grey. The grey on those walls had a source now. It was made of penguins, of the fat of tame animals that had walked up to be killed, and it went on darkening the room and the men in it. And not one of them said a word about what the colour was made of. There was nothing to say. You cannot be warm and clean at the bottom of the world. You choose warm. For most of the day, the light in that hut was not the sun at all. It was a blubber lamp, an old tin with seal bones stuck down into a pool of fat for wicks, winking and smoking in the corner. That was their daytime, for a good part of the day. Not the 4 hours of low, real sun outside, but a bone burning in fat, throwing just enough light to read a face by. And here is the difference that no one names out loud. The difference that makes the second winter a heavier thing than the first. The first winter had been a season, a beginning, a middle, and a promised end, with a ship at the far side of it. You can bear almost anything that has an end you can see. But the second winter was not a season. It was a repetition. It was the same grey room, the same soot, the same low sun, the same books drying by the same stove, only this time with the end taken out of it. The first winter they had been men, doing a hard job with a homecoming at the end. The second winter, they were simply men in a room, waiting for a change that had already declined to come once, and had no particular reason to come now. The work was the same, the comforts were the same, everything was the same. That was the whole of the horror, and it had no shape you could point at. And then, on the 18th of February, a storm came up out of the south, and it froze the whole Sound solid in a single night. The ice that had refused to break up all summer was now welded shut for good, and the door of the year closed on them with it. They had planned for one winter. Now they had two. Go back 6 weeks, though, because the men at Snow Hill were not the only ones out on that ice, and they were, in a sense, the lucky ones. They at least had a house. On the 29th of December, 1902, some way off to the north, the Captain Larsen had brought the Antarctic as far south as the pack would let him, and could get no further. So he did the sensible thing. He put 3 men over the side to walk. Johan Gunnar Andersen, the geologist and second in command, Samuel Duse, the artillery lieutenant, cartographer, artist, and Toralf Grunden, an able seaman. 3 men and a sledge set down on the shore to cover the roughly 200 miles to Snow Hill Overland, on foot, and fetch Nordenskjöld's party, while the ship worked round by sea to meet everyone. It was a plan. It was a good plan. Everyone was cheerful about it. And nobody was more cheerful about it than the 3 men doing the walking. Jews and Grundon, in particular, seem to have regarded the whole business as very nearly a lark. 200 miles across unknown ice being, in their reckoning, a manageable errand and a fine bit of exercise. They had no doubts. Why would they? They were fit. They were provisioned. They had a sledge and a plan and a destination, and the ship would be along presently to gather everyone up. It was going to be, at worst, an interesting few weeks. From the deck, the botanist Scotsberg watched them go, and he set down how they parted. They had said goodbye, he wrote, with a hearty ringing "We shall soon meet at the wintering station." And at 11 that night, they caught their last glimpse of the 3 of them, dragging their sledge up the snow-covered slope and over the rise and out of sight. Soon. Everyone said soon. It was the most natural word in the world to say. The 3 men on the shore had been landed with provisions. Enough, as the reckoning went, for 9 men for 2 months. Hold those 2 numbers a moment. 9 men, 2 months. Now look at who was actually standing there on the ice with the sledge. 3 men. And the shore they meant to leave in a fortnight was one they would not leave for the better part of a year. Do that arithmetic yourself, slowly, the way they never got to, because they had no idea it needed doing. 9 men's food for 2 months, spread thin across 3 men, and stretched and stretched and stretched. They named the place they'd been dropped for what they were doing there. Hoppet's Vic, Hope Bay. The Bay of Hope, hope of a ship. And the march failed almost at once. In the first week of January, they came skiing down toward what should have been their road onward. And Anderson wrote the moment plainly. A few strokes more of the ski, and they came to a standstill with a cry of dismay. The way is closed. An arm of the sea lay across their path. Sydney Herbert Sound. Open water, where there should have been solid footing. And the whole expanse of it in front of them, that dreadful blue-green colour whose meaning they had learned the hard way. Out on the wet sea ice, in the days behind them. That colour meant the ice would not bear a man. As far as the eye could reach across the Sound, it was that same treacherous green. It was impossible to cross. The way is closed, Anderson wrote, and then again, as if saying it twice might change it. The way is closed. They could not get to Snow Hill. 6 men were sitting in a warm hut 200 miles off, and these 3 could not reach them, and could not be reached, and could do nothing about either fact. So they turned back on the 7th, and reached the mainland shore ice at 6 in the morning on the 8th, and worked their way back to the depot they had left. The 200 miles now shrunk to the small patch of shore they had actually managed to hold. The errand had lasted a matter of days and accomplished nothing, and there was nothing to do but sit down beside their 9 men's rations and wait for the ship they were sure would come. So they turned back, and from a headland called Cape Gordon, they looked out across the Gulf and saw, out there, a wide expanse of open, ice-free blue water, and they took comfort in it. That was the thing they did that day, standing on the cape looking at the open sea. They eased the sting of their own failure, Anderson wrote, with the hope that the Antarctic would be able to make her way through to the wintering station. They had failed to reach their friends. But the ship could surely still get through. And they turned that thought over and warmed their hands on it and started back toward the depot with their spirits a little restored. The ship would get through. The ship was leaking. 2 days after the 3 men waved from the slope, on the last day of the year, the ice had closed on the Antarctic and made her fast. Then a gale came up from the north and drove the whole enormous field of it southward. And the ship went with it, carried, Scotsberg wrote, helplessly by the ice, now with her bows leading, now her stern, now swung broadside, in among islands and icebergs and hidden reefs, with no more say in her direction than a chip of wood in a mill race. On the captain's advice, the men slept in their clothes. You do that when you may have to be over the side and running in the time it takes to pull on your boots. So you don't pull on your boots, you just sleep ready. And she began to take the pressure into her body. On the 10th of January, this is a small scene, and remember its date, because it matters. The men had finished dinner and sat down to a hand of cards, and the ship began to tremble like an aspen leaf, and a crash sent them all up the ladder onto the deck. The ice had her. It was crushing to powder along her sides, and lifting her stern 4 feet higher than it should have sat. It was a bad moment. And then it passed, and it caused them, in Scotsberg's own words, no uneasiness at all. And they went back below, and one imagines back to their cards. That was January. She had weeks yet. But she was wounded, and a wounded wooden ship tells you so through her pumps. And here is the sound of that winter aboard her. The sound Scotsberg could never afterward get out of his head. The rattling, he wrote, the everlastingly unchanged, noisy discontent of the pumps, heard hour after hour, day after day. Everlastingly unchanged. Say that to yourself in the dark. It was the sameness again, in its purest and most audible form. Not a threat, not a crisis, just a machine complaining at exactly the same pitch forever, reminding them without pause of exactly where they were. That rattle of the pumps, Scotsberg wrote, will never leave my memory. The sound will ever remind me of the longest days of my life. The only time the sound of the ship changed, the only time it woke him, was not silence. It was motion. On the 16th of January, he wrote, I was awakened by the vessel beginning to move. That was the good news when it came. Not quiet. Movement. And what strikes you, reading Scotsberg's account of those weeks, is how little fear there is in it. No confusion, he wrote, not a trace of fear or doubt. All of them working systematically, at high pressure, each man to his task. The cook and the steward, he noticed, went about their business through the whole of it exactly as though nothing were the matter. And at the usual hour, on the usual morning, breakfast was served in the gunroom as it always had been. A hull with a wound in it, an ice field grinding at her sides, and breakfast on the table at the appointed time, the plates laid, the coffee poured, the ordinary hours kept while the ice worked at the walls. And through all of it, they were cheerful, ferociously and deliberately cheerful, and nobody worked harder at it than the captain. Weeks before the end, the botanist went to Larsen with a small, blunt confession disguised as a request. He'd like, he said, to take the oilcloth cover from the gunroom to wrap around his pressed plants. Because, he told the captain to his face, you needn't try to make me believe that this boat will hold out any longer. It was as plain as a man could say it. She's dying, and I'm packing. And Larsen would not have it. No, no, said the captain. I intend going home now. Do you think I've time to stay down here during the winter? As if the whole thing were a scheduling matter. As if the Antarctic Ocean were a train he had no intention of missing. They kept the calendar too, the way the men at Snow Hill kept theirs. On the 21st of January, King Oscar's birthday, they dressed the leaking ship in her flags and fired a salute. 21 guns banged off into the ice from a vessel that was slowly filling with water beneath their feet. And they drank the king's health on deck and raised their glasses, and someone called out, "Skål, lads! We'll bring the old boat home to Stockholm yet." 21 guns and a toast to a homecoming. From men working the pumps in shifts to stay afloat. On that ship, hope had stopped being a feeling. It had become a thing they did with their hands. The pumps, in shifts in wet clothes, hour after hour, around the clock. Scottsburg. Admitted it in the end, though it took him a while and he slipped it in almost sideways, the way a man admits a thing he'd rather not. All that good humor, all that chatter and song and refusal to sit in silence, it was, he confessed, a performance laid over the top of despair. Even if, deep down in our hearts, we consider the situation desperate. A hang-gallows wit, he called it. The gallows humor of the condemned. And he said it flourished in their midst. They kept each other laughing precisely because, underneath, each of them had done the sum. There was a mate aboard who put the other face of it into words. One evening in the gunroom, pacing and philosophizing in the way men do. "Just think," he said, "how lucky we've been the whole time. What extraordinary good fortune in every single difficulty we've met." He was pleased about it. He meant it warmly. And then he said it. The 12th of February. They examined her that morning, fully and finally, and the report was a sentence you cannot argue with. 1/3 of the vessel's keel was gone. A hole had been made, Scottsburg wrote, that no human skill here could close. That was the whole of it. Not, she's in trouble. A hole no skill could close. The pumping had never been about saving her. The pumping had only ever been about the pace. So at 2 a.m, they cut her loose into a lead of open water, and they hoisted her sails, to run her at the land, while she still had it in her to run. And Scottsburg watched the sails go up, and felt it was a solemn thing, almost a holy thing. She floated freely once more. And it seemed to him, this is a botanist, writing, a careful man, not given to fancy. It seemed as if she had become endowed with life, as if she knew what was at stake, as if she meant to spend her last strength reaching the saving land. They had never, he wrote, seen her cleave the waves so swiftly. A dying ship running her fastest because it was the end, and she seemed to know it. On the bridge stood Larsen, and you could read the suspense in his face, and Skogsberg, who understood by now what he was watching, asked him, "When we have to stop, do you think you can keep her?" And the captain, who had been to sea since the age of 9, who had refused all winter to believe a word of it, gave him the truth at last. "That depends," he said. "It's impossible to say." "I hardly think so." And then he said the thing that a man only says about the one loss he cannot dress up. "Do you know," he asked, "how it feels for a skipper to lose his craft?" Some of them had seen it coming, clearly enough to prepare. Days before the end, Skogsberg and the zoologist, K.A. Anderson, had gone quietly through the ship's scientific harvest, the specimens, the notes, the collections. That were the whole reason any of them had come, and made, with what Skogsberg called calm foresight, a portable selection of the most valuable parts of it, small enough to carry off in a hurry. It was a cold-blooded thing to do, while the captain was still insisting she'd hold. It was also exactly right. A great deal of the science went down with her, regardless. But some of it, chosen in advance by 2 men who had done the sum, came off in a man's arms. They worked her while they could. 6 pumps going, the winch deafening, water flung out through every hose and pipe they had, and the water inside her rising all the same, up past the keelson, up and up, until the order came, "All stand by, she's going to sink." And then it was a matter of getting things onto the ice. Sacks and barrels and tins and boxes handed down onto the floe she was moored to, the mattresses, the planks, the sails, the tools. The ship's cats carried down in a state of pure terror, which any creature that has ever lived on a ship would understand. There is one detail from those hours that I cannot get out of my own head, and it is very quiet. They stood on the ice and waited for the rats. A ship that size carries rats in the hundreds down in her dark, and everyone knows it. And when a ship dies, the rats are supposed to come pouring off her. So the men watched for them. "We are waiting," Skogsberg wrote, "for the rats to make their appearance, but not one can be seen, although there must be hundreds of them. Not one." They had been down in her when the sea came in the deep places, and they never came up. She took them with her. Before they left her, they gathered in the gun room one last time, that low, warm room where every plan of the expedition had been argued and every joke told, and they drank her health. "Proudly has she lived," they said. "Proudly shall she die. A health to the Antarctic, and thanks for what she had been." And they went up the ladder one by one, and Skogsberg wrote that he did not dare so much as look back at the cupboard where all his plants were lying, that he had wrapped so carefully in that borrowed oilcloth. For the cover was his now. On the morning she died, he had asked the captain again for it. "Well," he said, "I think I can take the cover." And this time, he wrote, unfortunately, his wish met with no opposition. the captain had run out of denial. That was how you knew. They dressed her to die. The Swedish flag went up at the gaff, pennants at the main and the mizzen. And then they cut the ropes and hauled on the lines and dragged her the last of the way themselves. "We drag her to her grave," he wrote, in the literal sense of the term. And they stood in a long row on the edge of the ice, 30 yards off, and could not take their eyes from her. Her engines were still turning over on the last of the steam, the fires long dead. The pumps were still going, and the sound of the pumps grew fainter and fainter and fainter. "She is breathing her last," he wrote, until the water climbed to her rail, and then, with a rattle, the sea and the broken ice rushed in over her deck all at once. "That sound," Scotsberg wrote, "I can never forget, however long I may live." The blue and yellow of the flag drew down into the deep. The masts struck the edge of the floe and snapped, one after another, and the streamer with her name on it went under. And she was gone. The captain photographed the whole of it. Larsen, who had refused all winter to believe she would die, stood on the ice and worked his camera as she went, plate after plate, glass plate after glass plate, a man making a record of the drowning of the thing he loved most in the world. At work on the injured stern. A last farewell. The end approaching. And the last plate of all, when there was nothing left above the water but the tops of her masts, he simply captioned, "The end." 20 men now stood on the ice, 25 miles from the nearest land, and nobody in the world knew where they were. That first night, something happened that no one who reads this story ever quite expects, and it is the truest thing in the whole of it. They had lost their ship at midday. By evening they had made camp on the floe, a rough tent thrown together out of a few spars and a couple of topsails, another sail laid down for a floor, and Scotsberg was outside it, in the cold, and he stopped because he could not believe his own ears. From inside the tent came the sound of merry voices. One burst of laughter after another. And under the laughter, threading through it, the wheeze and lift of a concertina. Somebody had saved a concertina off the drowning ship, and somebody was playing it, and the men were laughing. He stood there and worked out why, and the answer is the heart of this whole long story. The suspense was over. That was it. They knew, now, exactly what they had to expect. They had no ship. They would not see Sweden this year, and there was a kind of terrible relief in simply knowing it. The uncertainty that had been fraying their sleep at night and their work by day for weeks and weeks had finally been changed into certainty. A fearful certainty, yes, but a certainty. And a man can lie down under a certainty in a way he can never lie down under a dread. Then the ice made them earn it. 16 days they spent on that floe, and the ones it broke into, dragging their whole survival across it toward the nearest land. And it was not the smooth white plain of anyone's imagining. It was pressure ice everywhere, Scotsberg wrote, and of a dreadful kind, heaved up in ridges and hummocks, and at every ridge the men on the hauling line, 10 of them, leaning into it, had to stop and take axes to the ice to cut a road for the boats. They had put beechwood runners under the little flat-bottomed pram to turn it into a sledge. The big whale boats they could only drag by main force. And those boats were monstrous, clumsy things, and Scotsburg said so with a botanist's honesty. He had never seen such clumsy monsters of boats. But they had, he admitted, one saving quality, which was that they would float almost anything. So the men chopped and hauled and swore, and the work went on, in his phrase, with laugh and joke. They were shipwrecked and starving cold and hundreds of miles from anywhere, and they kept up a running patter the whole way, because that was the only thing that was theirs to keep. When the ice gave out entirely and open water lay across the road, there was nothing for it but to ferry, to load the boats and cross the lead a few men and a few sacks at a time, and unload on the far side and row back for the next. On one such day, it took 11 boatloads to get the party and its goods across a single stretch of water, a cold and wet business, hour upon hour of rowing back and forth across a gap in the ice that a ship would have crossed without noticing. And at night, when they stopped, the ice they camped on was not safe either. One night, an iceberg came grinding by in the dark and took a corner clean off the piece they were lying on, quietly, the way you might trim a slice off a loaf, while they slept on what was left of it. Then, on the 22nd of February, the floe simply broke apart underneath them. It went to pieces, great fragments of it spinning off in every direction, and Scotsburg looked around and saw the expedition scattered across a shattering plain of ice. Some of their people stranded on one drifting piece, others marooned with the stores on another. Men who a moment before had been carrying a sack of bread or a bundle of clothing, now floating quietly away from each other on separate rafts of ice in different directions, out into the Sound. He himself was in one of the little boats, sailing about among the wreckage of the floor that had been holding them all up. And then, this is the detail I love. Once they had gathered themselves back together, once they had rounded up the drifting men and the drifting bread, and not, by some mercy, lost anybody to the water, they did the most human thing imaginable. They made coffee. By degrees, he wrote, they came together and refreshed themselves with a cup of coffee. They lost a great deal that day when the floe broke. They lost their mattresses, all but 2 of their planks, all 3 pairs of skis, and very nearly their whole supply of salt. The mattresses are worth marking, because a man has to sleep on something, and after that day, these men had nothing soft left in the world. Whatever they would lie down on, from here on, it would not be a mattress. That went into the sea on the 22nd of February, and it did not come back. On the last day, the 28th, they made their run for the shore. The boats were loaded so deep with everything they could not bear to leave that the least careless movement would have shipped water over the side and swamped them. Whatever would not fit was piled in a great heap on the ice, with a Swedish flag on a bamboo rod stuck up beside it as a marker. They pulled away in the morning and rowed for 6.5 hours without stopping, without food or drink, having had nothing since the evening before, because the shore was there, at last, and a man will row through his own hunger to reach it. And near the end, They smelled land before they saw it. Somebody said he could make out a bird standing on a heap of stones, and then it reached all of them at once, faint on the wind, the smell of guano. The unlovely reek of a penguin rookery drifting out over the ice, and it was the smell of solid ground, and it was wonderful. The penguins themselves were considerably less delighted. Scotsburg noted that they shrieked in confused outrage at the boats, as though they thoroughly disapproved of these invaders who seemed to mean to make a home there. "Who can describe," he wrote, "the feelings with which we heard the boats touch the shore? What joy, what happiness in once more treading firm earth. And there is one more small thing from those last hours on the ice, and it tells you everything about what they knew was coming. The last time they had sugar in their coffee, the last time there would be as much butter and biscuit as a man wanted, Scotsburg watched the sugar go into the cup with a kind of ceremony, and he confessed something. I believe," he wrote, "I took twice as many pieces as usual, although I prefer the smaller quantity." He didn't even like it that sweet. He took the extra anyway because he knew it was the last of it, and a man reaches for the last of a sweet thing even when it is more than he wants. On the 28th of February, they rowed the last stretch, and the boats touched the shore, and they stepped out onto firm land. The land they had reached was a bare ring of black volcanic rock called Paulet Island, and it was not a rescue. It was only a place to be shipwrecked that did not drift. There was no help on it, and no way off it, and winter was coming down on it fast. And so, that night, the map of the expedition looked like this. Here, on Paulet, 20 men on a bare island, cutting stone to build a wall against the dark. 200 miles off, in a stone shelter by a hopeful bay, 3 men eating their slow way through a ration meant for 9. And 200 miles beyond them, in a grey wooden house that still stood exactly where it had been built, 6 men taking down the weather on the hour for a ship that lay on the sea floor. 3 parties. Oh, 3 roofs. 1 frozen sea between them. And not a single one of the 3 had any idea that the other 2 were still alive. But go back, now, to the very first night, the night of the ship, the night of the concertina, and the laughing men, and the wheezing little instrument in the dark. Because of all the nights out on that ice, it was the first one that stayed with Scotsburg longest, and it stayed with him for the strangest of reasons. The worst thing they had feared had finally, actually happened. The ship was gone. There was nothing left to dread, because the dread had come true. And so the first night on the ice, he wrote, cold and shipwrecked, and adrift at the bottom of the world, was spent in a slumber, calmer and deeper than any they had had during the whole of the past month. So now there were 3 roofs. Picture the map from high up, the way no one alive that winter could. At the top, on its little triangle of rock, the grey wooden house at Snow Hill, 6 men, a library, a stove, and a second winter simply beginning around them, without event. 25 miles and 1 frozen sound to the north, in a hopeful bay, a low stone shelter roofed with an upside-down sledge, 3 men, and no books. And out to the east, on a bare black ring of volcanic rock in the sea, a long stone hut, still going up under sail, and seal skin, 20 voices, cutting stone. 3 roofs. 1 sea between them. And not a soul under any of the 3 had the faintest idea that the other 2 existed. The 2 stone huts were built the same fortnight by men who did not know they were both building. On Paulet, the 20 had started around the 1st of March, rolling great rounded basalt blocks down the hillside for foundations, laying them in double rows the way the captain taught them, carrying flat slabs up the slope on their backs, hour after hour, until they had double walls all round and a ridge of lashed tent poles and boat hooks over the top, with the ship's sails laid across it and 30 sealskins over that. They moved in on the 7th of March, and Scottsburg, surveying the result, could not resist a review. The style, he wrote, was quite new and might be called Paulet Island architecture. It was, he suspected, unrepresented anywhere else in the world, and he sincerely hoped that none of his readers would ever find themselves forced to adopt it. The 3 at Hope Bay built their own version out of whatever they had, which was almost nothing, so they built it out of the expedition itself. When the walls were up to the full height of a man, they needed a roof beam, and they had no beam, so they took the sledge, the very sledge they had hauled across the ice, and built it into the walls upside down to carry the roof. The doorway they left about 2.5 feet square, a hole you could not walk through, could barely crawl through, so that to get inside, a man put his legs back over the threshold first, dropped to his knees, and reversed himself in like something going into a burrow. And the door that closed that hole and the frame around it they made of their fossil boxes, the wooden crates of ancient plant remains they had carried off the ship. 2 fossil box lids for the door. 2 boxes of Jurassic plants stood on end for the frame. They were living, quite literally, inside their own science collection, sleeping behind a door made of the deep past. And over all 3 roofs, at the same hour, hung the same thin ration of light. This is the thing to hold on to, because it is the only thing the 3 rooms truly shared. Nordenskjöld had written of it himself, how the days grew shorter and shorter, the sun at noon standing lower and lower along the northern horizon, until even at midwinter it cleared the edge of the world for something over 4 hours a day, and no more. 4 hours. A low, level, unhurried light, the same at Snow Hill and at Hope Bay and on Paulet, sliding along the horizon and sinking back, day after day, over 3 roofs at once, while under each of them, a group of men was quietly certain it might be the only one left. There is a verdict the historians hand down about that winter, and it is a strange one. The men in the wooden house, they say, were quite comfortable. The best housed men in Antarctica were the 6 at Snow Hill, the ones with the stove and the shelves of books and the punch. And they were also the ones with the least to hold on to, because the 2 stone huts, for all their cold and squalor, were built on a task, and the wooden house had run out of tasks. But no one needs to say any of that out loud. You only have to hold the 3 roofs in your head at once: a stone box with a sledge for a beam, a stone hut with a door of fossils, and a comfortable wooden house going quietly to seed, and let them sit there together under the same 4 hours of low sun. You know something now that none of them knew. Let us go down into the rooms. Start at Hope Bay in the low stone shelter with the 3 men and no books. The thing that saved them was a rota. From the day they moved in, they agreed to share the work dead equally. Every 3rd day, each man took his turn to sit on the vegetable box and cook the plain food for the others. And Anderson, who noticed things, noticed something about the 2 days off that followed a man's turn in the kitchen. You would think 2 idle days a mercy. And the first one was, but by the 2nd day, he wrote, a man lay in his bag, actually wishing he were back at work in the kitchen again, so that their little rota turned out to give them the one thing the winter was starving them of, which was a change, a necessary change, in the grinding sameness of it all. They had stumbled, entirely by accident, onto the exact dose of idleness a human being can stand. It was one day. On the 3rd day of nothing, a man wanted his box back. And after every meal that came off that box, the same small ceremony, when breakfast was done, Anderson and Deuce would thank the cook of the day. Thank you. And Grunden, or whoever had cooked, would answer, don't mention it. These civilities, Anderson wrote, were exchanged after every single meal between the day's cook and the 2 gentlemen at ease. And it was, he said, a real relief, in this wild man's life of theirs, to hear in that little exchange a distant echo of the language of polite intercourse, of somewhere more civilized. The translator of the book adds a quiet footnote for the English reader in case he missed it. In Sweden, that is the thank you a household says after a meal to the wife, the mother, the hostess. So there they were. 3 filthy men in a stone box at the bottom of the world, saying grace to each other, saying the thing you say to your mother after every meal for 6 months, because it was the last thread of home they could still reach. They had no books, not one, and they found that they missed the plain act of reading almost the way they missed food. So when the craving for a few printed words came over them, they took out their tins and they read the labels. Le lait condensé, préparé par Henri Nestlé. Boiled beef. They read the condensed milk tin for pleasure, the way you might read a letter. 25 miles off, on its shelf, in the warm wooden house, stood a whole library, hundreds of volumes, donated by the goodwill of the Swedish publishers, exactly where it had always been. It might as well have been on the moon. No hand at Hope Bay would ever touch it, and no man at Snow Hill knew there was anyone alive to want it. So they made their own reading out of memory. Anderson and Deuce, 2 educated men, would lie in the dark and reconstruct whole novels for Grunden, the sailor, everything they could still remember of the Count of Monte Cristo, and the 3 Musketeers recited from memory by blabber light to an audience of 1. And they talked. Deuce, the artillery officer, would explain the workings of a modern field gun or the Swedish automatic rifle. They refought the old battles of the day in the dark, Colenso and Sedan, and, one night, in jest, Anderson and Grunden made Jews solemnly promise that the moment he got home, he would marry an heiress and then buy a pleasure yacht, with Grunden as its captain, and take the whole party for a cruise round the Mediterranean. 3 starving men in a freezing stone box, planning a yacht in the warm blue Mediterranean, and each of them getting the thing he wanted out of it: the sailor his ship, the geologist his warm coast, and poor Deuce, who had to do the marrying, getting nothing but the bill. There was, in that rough little interior of theirs, a kind of comfort Anderson tried to put his finger on. In the evening, the tent inside the hut went nearly dark, except for one large round patch of flickering light the night lamp threw up onto the ceiling, and around that single glow, the 3 of them lay and talked. It reminded him, he wrote, of the cozy feeling of a Swedish evening fire, of being a child again, at the hour for stories, told in the half-shadow of the glowing embers, while the snow whirled around the house outside. Thoughts, he said, fly fast and free in the wilderness. And a man could lie in a stone box on the edge of the world, cold and hungry and unwashed, and for the length of a story be 9 years old again and warm by a hearth at home. Meanwhile, in the wooden house, 6 men, who were obliged to do nothing at all, invented a holiday to fill the day, and drank a little punch, and were bored. Grunden was the one who sang. He'd be cook for the day, thawing the ice in the coffee pot, the seal blubber crackling in the pan, and he'd sit there and hum, and then sing. A music hall ditty, or something he'd picked up on the Florida coasts, or some daft Norwegian verse about a girl who went to a ball in borrowed shoes and stuffed hay in the toes because they were too big for her. But he always came back to the songs of the sea. And when he sang those, Anderson wrote, you could tell that Grunden, for that moment, was not with them at all. Not in the dirt and the dark of that dead white land, but far away, out in a screaming storm off the Norwegian coast, hauling for his life. They were songs about hard nights, when a man's whole life hung on whether the pumps could keep some wretched leaking tub afloat. He sang about the pumps, and the blubber crackled in the pan, and the low light held the 3 of them in the little stone box, and outside the wind went on across the ice toward wherever it was going. And through all of it, this is the part Anderson wanted his reader to understand. There was no ill will. None. He says so directly, and he sounds almost astonished by it. None of that unforgiving, ever-increasing bad blood that fills so many accounts of other expeditions, wintering in far kinder conditions than theirs. The longer the 3 of them were shut in that box, the better they came to know every crease and quirk of one another's tempers, and the tighter they held together. That was the pressure they were under. Not that they were falling apart. That they were holding a courtesy in place, 3 men and a thank you and a don't mention it, day after day, in a stone hut with nothing in it, and it cost them something to do it, and they paid it, every meal, and never let it drop. Now cross to Paulet, to the 20 voices of the stone hut, and everything gets larger and worse. 20 men lay in that long stone box, in 2 rows of 10 sleeping bags down the 2 long walls, and between the rows ran a single aisle about 4 feet wide. That aisle was the entire common ground of their world, the one place a man could stand that was not his own bag, and they gave it a name. They called it Karl Johan, after the Grand Boulevard in Stockholm, the finest promenade in the capital. It was a joke, and it was the bitterest joke in the story, because that 4-foot boulevard had, over the months, gradually become the kitchen midden, the rubbish heap, the place, the scraps, and the slops, and the rot went, because there was nowhere else for them to go. A dreadful smell rose off it, Scottsberg wrote, and the rotting penguin skins some men had slid under their bags for a little softness were worse still, so that when you came in out of the fresh air, it was, at first, almost impossible to breathe. Their grand boulevard was their garbage. And when a mild day came, and the temperature indoors climbed to a balmy 3 or 4 degrees above freezing, it did not get better. It got worse, because the filth thawed. They slept on stone. The mattresses were gone, long gone, sunk under the ice the day the floe broke apart, and no one on that island had lain on anything soft since. So their beds were the bare rounded basalt of the island, knobbly and sharp, with nothing over it but thin rags. And in the mornings, this is the sentence to hold: a man woke with a vault of ice above his own face. He had breathed all night through the closed blanket to keep some warmth in, and his breath had frozen on the canvas an inch above his nose, so that he opened his eyes to a little ceiling of ice made of himself. Their boots stood by them, frozen as hard as sheet iron. And every single day, Scottsberg wrote, someone complained of cold feet. Cold feet every day for months. It was the one grievance that never stopped. 25 miles away, in the warm wooden house, 6 men lay in their berths, with a fire going, and a peculiar affliction of their own. Their heads sweated, while their feet froze, because the warm air rose and the cold pooled, 20 degrees of difference between a man's scalp and his boots in the same small room. The best-housed men in Antarctica, lying awake with cold feet. The worst-housed men in Antarctica, lying awake with cold feet. 25 miles apart, the same complaint, and neither room with the least idea the other was there. The nights on Paulet were long and full of dreams, and the dreams were cruel because they grouped themselves around exactly 2 things: food and rescue, and a man could dream his way through an entire dinner, soup to dessert, and see the relief ship come in, and feel the arms of the people on board go round him, and be patted on the back, and then wake up. Scottsberg, lying on his stones, said he often thought of Hamlet. To sleep, perchance to dream. And the days were not much better than the nights. He and his neighbor, K.A. Anderson, took to walking up and down outside when they could, because, as Scottsberg put it plainly, one grows stupid lying in the bags all day. That was the true weight of it, not agony, but a slow-going stupid, a man feeling his own mind thin out. His watch had broken months before, so he had lost the time entirely. He would reach over and poke K.A. Anderson awake in the dark simply to ask him what hour it was. 25 miles north, in the wooden house, the meteorological readings were still being taken. On the hour, every hour, all winter, written down in the neat columns, a clock kept faithfully in a room that the room on Paulet did not know existed. They were sick, too, some of them. A heaviness, a bleeding of the gums, an old sailor's complaint they had no name for that they trusted. They believed the tinned food had somehow poisoned them, gone bad in the cans, and that was not stupidity. It was very nearly the newest medical thinking of the age. The notion that sickness came from something tainted, getting inside you. Scottsburg thought it was the fresh blubber that kept them well, and he was right that the blubber saved them, and wrong about why. And the men who were right about nothing and ate the fat anyway got better. Nobody in that hut ever understood what had actually been wrong with them, or what had actually cured it. They just ate the fat and lived. There were small, mad mercies. Old Haslam, the second mate, out of tobacco, smoked dried tea leaves, mixed with snuff, and sent up clouds foul enough to raise your hair. A man named Martin, desperate for something to chew, would beg in advance for any pipe that might get broken so he could chew the bowl. And once, on Midsummer Day, at 1/2 degree below freezing, practically a heat wave, the ship's cat ran up and down the hut as if it had lost its mind entirely, delirious with the almost warmth, evidently enjoying life to the absolute utmost. At night, the train oil lamp winked faintly through the smoky dark, and nothing could be heard but the breathing of the sleepers. And then there was Easter. They had been longing for it for weeks, and the longing grew the nearer it came, and it was not for anything holy, it was for rice porridge. Rice porridge. What a small and ridiculous thing to pin a month of hope to, and they knew it was ridiculous, and they pinned it there anyway. Because what is penguin soup, Scottsburg asked, next to the mere thought of rice porridge? And when the day came, the cook toiled in with the great heavy pot, and a most delicious aroma spread through the hut, and the steam filled the low room, and the plates went round, and they sat and longed for their turn to come. Never in their lives, he wrote, had they eaten anything so good. And here is the thing he did with his, the small, unbearable thing. He did not eat all of it. It would have been extravagant, a prodigality, to take the whole portion at one sitting. So he set his plate up on the shelf behind him and left a little bit for the morrow. Before we cross back over the ice, let me ask you something, and I'll go first, because it's only fair. Right now, as I tell you this, I'm settled in my old armchair, with a blanket over my knees, and the last of the fire gone down to embers. And by the clock on the mantel, it's just gone 11 at night. That's where I am. So tell me, down in the comments, wherever you happen to be listening from tonight, what corner of the world are you in, and what time is it there? A man on that island lost the hours entirely and had to wake his neighbor to ask, "You still have yours? I'd love to know where you're keeping them." And now the wooden house, and one man, and a box on the floor. The first winter, Otto Nordenskjöld had written a sentence about his life indoors, and it was a contented sentence. During the day, he said, he lay in his berth and read. That was the good winter. Now turn to the page he wrote, the second winter, 140-odd pages further, into the same book, about the same shelf of books, in the same small room. My books and papers, he writes, which I keep in a box on the floor, are wet and moldy, and would be destroyed in a few weeks, were they not taken out now and then to be dried. The first winter he lay in his berth and read. The second winter he lifts his books out of a box on the floor and dries them like wet washing, so they will not rot away entirely. Same man, same hut, same box. And there is a second sentence that turns the same way. You'll remember his little boast at the end of that first good winter, the pride he took in the fact that, what with all their work and all their reading, they were never obliged that winter to take refuge in card-playing to pass the time. Well, here he is, a year later, in the same room, setting down what he now understands about how men keep from turning on each other in a place like this. It is indispensable, he writes, indispensable, that the harmony among the party be as great as it possibly can. Community of labor is the strongest thing holding them together. And next to that, he says, he places community in amusements, card playing, for example. Card playing. The very thing. The man who was proud he never needed to take refuge in the cards now names them, in so many words, one of the things that keep men human. He wrote both sentences. He never set them side by side. I have only done what he didn't. The room around him was rotting. Snow crystals and drops of water and mildew, every iron thing gone to rust, the bedclothes falling to pieces in the damp. Wake in that house and your breath was on the wall. The very things you owned were quietly returning to the weather. And this is the part that has no drama in it, and that is exactly the point. Nothing was happening. The second winter was not more violent than the first. There was no fresh catastrophe to mark it, no worse storm, no new disaster to point at and say, there, that is when it turned. It was only the same again, the same 4 hours of low sun, crawling the horizon and sinking back, the same grey light, the same faces, the same box of books to be dried and put back and dried again, with the one thing removed that had made the first winter bearable, which was the knowledge that it would end. A man in that room could feel his own days losing their edges, one bleeding into the next, and could not have told you, most mornings, which day it was, without checking. That was the horror at Snow Hill. Not an event. The absence of one stretched to the length of a year. And the 6 of them stayed in it and did the work, because the work was all there was. The second winter passed, as he put it almost lightly, with meteorological readings, and a few sledge journeys for the sake of variety. Read that again and let it land. They kept taking the readings. On the hour, all through that second winter, in a rotting house, they measured the temperature and the pressure and the wind and wrote the numbers in the column. One small station faithfully reporting into a great international web of science, a web they had no way on earth to reach, for a ship that was lying on the sea floor. A man at the bottom of the world, writing a number in a column for colleagues who by now were quite sure he was dead. And yet, the room was still a room where things got said. Somewhere in that grey winter, the men fell to talking about what they missed. Not food, not warmth, the deeper things. And one of them said the thing he longed for most in the world was cigars, music, and books. Nordenskjöld wrote it down. He didn't say who said it. He gives the man that much privacy, even now, even after a year in one room together. But he heard it, and he set it down, 6 grey men in a mouldering house, saying out loud what they ached for, and one of them caring enough to keep it. And it was that same leader who, in the worst winter of his life, would sit down with the young Argentine, Sobral, and go on teaching him Swedish, word by patient word. According to the polar historian Ursula Rack, who has read the diaries, Nordenskjöld had become the boy's one true anchor in that house, and, by the same reading, the language never quite took, and the boy was never quite let all the way in. The warmth and the sadness of it are the one fact, a man teaching another man his language across a table in the cold, out of pure kindness, and the kindness not quite reaching all the way across. Then the room closed over again. They were going grey, the men and the walls together, at the same slow rate, in the same color, from the fat they burned to stay alive. There is one more thing about that winter, and it is only a fact. A little to the north of them, that very same winter of 1903, another expedition was wintering on the ice, the Scottish party, under Bruce, the man Nordenskjöld had shaken hands with in London 2 years before, the man who had agreed that if anything ever went wrong, he would come. And there he was. In Nordenskjöld's own words, Bruce's people spent that winter in the same region as the Swedes, though in somewhat more northern latitudes, the 2 stations lying, as Nordenskjöld had once hoped they would, within a couple of degrees of latitude of one another. 2 men who had made an appointment, a couple of degrees apart, each in a hut of his own, that same winter, writing numbers in the same kind of column, and neither of them with the slightest idea that the other was there. The scientific half of that London handshake was being kept to the letter, in duplicate, by 2 men who could not reach each other across a stretch of water you could sail in a day. The other half of it, the half about coming to the rescue, was never called upon. Not because anyone failed, simply because no one in Europe knew where to look. Sobral turned in his bag that night in a language he was still learning, and the sun came up for its 4 hours and went down, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened, which was the whole of what was happening. On the 17th of May, the National Day of Norway, there was merriment in the stone hut on Paulet, and a festive feeling among the men, and for a little while even Wennesgard felt better. He was the young Norwegian seaman, 22 years old, who had joined the ship at Gothenburg the very first morning, back when all of this was a voyage and not a sentence. And through the winter, he had been failing. He had violent fits of coughing whenever he went out into the cold air, and other signs, the men thought, of consumption. of tuberculosis, the wasting disease that everyone in that century knew and dreaded. And so, that was what they believed was killing him, and they were tending a consumptive. And there was almost nothing they could do for him. Whatever a hut like that might have needed to treat a serious illness, they did not have. So little of any use had come ashore off the ship, and the medicine they carried would not have filled a shelf. A sick man on Paulet was simply a sick man, watched over and kept warm and waited with. He could not lie down. Something in his chest would not allow it, so he slept sitting up, which was the only posture left to him, propped in the corner of a stone hut at the bottom of the world. But on the 17th of May, there was singing and a bit of a feast, and he rallied, and for a few hours he was better. And then a few days passed, and he was worse again. It was in those days after, as he came down the far side of that last good afternoon, that they saw him writing. It was touching, Scotsburg wrote, to see him writing a few words of farewell to his parents and to his brothers and sisters, a boy of 22, in a stone box on a bare island, setting down goodbye to his family on the other side of the earth, in the sure knowledge he would not be carrying it to them himself. He would sit up night after night, moaning very softly and very slowly, because he could get almost no rest, and if a man happened to wake in the dark and look over, he would meet the gaze of Venersgaard's large, sorrowful, terrified eyes open in the lamplight. He hardly ever complained. He only moaned softly and sat up and waited. And what were his bodily sufferings, Scotsburg asked, beside the anguish in his mind, to sit there in the dirt and the wretchedness and listen to his comrades talk of rescue, of home, of friends, and to know, inside himself, that he was doomed to stay in this place forever and would never see his own country again. On the morning of the 7th of June, he said goodnight to the man who had been nursing him, Martin, the same Martin who chewed pipe bowls for want of tobacco, and he said it with a, "Now I shall sleep well." Good night in the morning. In that hut, the hours had come loose from their names months ago, day and night folded into one long dim thing, and so a dying man said goodnight at daybreak, and no one found it strange. Then he fell asleep sitting up, the only way he could, and the man in the next bag felt Venersgaard sink softly down against his shoulder, and there were a few rattling breaths, and then he was gone. It was dim and silent in the hut, and cold and clear and silent in the air outside. Death, Scotsburg wrote, the one guest who could reach us, had laid his hand on the little circle of comrades who had striven so long together to stay alive. They sewed him into his own sleeping bag, which was the only coffin they had to give him. And then the procession went slowly out through that low stone doorway, 20 men, bending one by one under a lintel 3.5 feet off the ground to carry their friend into the open, and they bore him down to one of the boats. The ground was frozen far too hard to open, so he could not be buried. Not properly, not yet. He would lie in a boat, and then in a great snowdrift, for months, until the spring softened the earth enough to build him a resting place. And then they walked slowly back up to the hut, where everything now spoke of death and corruption, and they filed in under that low door, and Scotsburg counted them as they came. 19 of us. 20 had carried him out. 19 came back in. Long ago, before any of this, before the ice, Nordenskjöld had watched this same boy lying by a campfire in Tierra del Fuego, at the warm green end of the Americas, trading nonsense across a language barrier with a local man named Modesto, the two of them asking and answering in tongues neither understood, until they both dissolved into laughter, the droll titter of the one and the ringing laugh of the youthful Northman. And both the merry laughter and the man are now naught but dreams. He was not killed by the ice, this one. Afterwards, when the symptoms were looked over more carefully, it was decided that Wennesgaard had probably died not of consumption at all, but of his heart. That the thing in his chest that would not let him lie down had been his heart failing, and not his lungs. Probably. No one had examined the body. There was no doctor on Paulet. The doctor was at Snow Hill, 25 miles, and a frozen sea away, tending 6 healthy men. So this is the expedition. Later, quietly correcting its own guess. Not medicine, reaching back to overrule them, just the record admitting it had not been sure. Which means the cruelest possibility of all is the true one. He was not taken by the cold, or the hunger, or the island. He would very likely have died that same year, in a warm bed in Norway. The bottom of the world simply happened to be where his heart gave out. The cairn they built for him is on Paulet still, on a bare slope, where the winter hears nothing but the wind, and the summer hears nothing but the confused crying of great flocks of penguins. Back at Hope Bay, the 3 men were fighting the wall. All winter, it had been the same, losing battle. They would plaster the outside of the hut with snow to seal it against the wind. A storm would come and strip the plaster away. They would mix snow with seawater and lay it on again so it froze to armor, and the wind would wear that away too. Almost as fast as they could build it. Plaster, storm, right through the winter. And then, in the end, they lost the fight in the only way that could have saved them. By midsummer, Anderson wrote, the hut lay completely hidden inside one great smooth hill of snow. The weather that had spent all winter trying to tear the house down had, at last, simply buried it, and being buried was what finally made it warm. They had been beaten into shelter. The food went the way food goes. 3 meals a day became 2. And on the 23rd of June, midwinter, even the small warmed-up midday scrap of meat was judged a dangerous luxury they could no longer afford. And they took it for the last time and gave it up. And on that same day, the 23rd of June, the day they surrendered their last little meal, Juice and Grunden went out onto the point and shot a seal. Both of those things happened on the one day, and Anderson set them down in the one breath, in the one paragraph, the loss and the gift arriving together. By August, they were soaked through. The thaw turned their buried roof into a slow indoor rain, and one night the water flooded the floor and drenched all 3 of them to the skin, and it took several nights of nothing but their own body heat to dry the sleeping bags out again. And in the meantime, Anderson admitted, it took no small amount of courage to climb into a cold, sodden sack at bedtime. Deuce, the artist, who had the worst spot on the floor, solved his own problem in a characteristic way. He carved himself a pair of wooden soles from the bottom of a bread barrel with a blunt knife and laid barrel staves under his bag, and cheerfully preferred the faint, woody taste his bed now had to the risk of another soaking. The same Deuce, incidentally, who invented grilled penguin, rolling the meat in crumbs of ship's biscuit. Their boots had worn through so completely that, and Anderson offers this as a plain measure of their condition, they could by now cut their own toenails without troubling to take the boots off. That, he wrote, was the first rough grasp of the hand from harshly grinning distress. And still, he insisted, it was strange how seldom they felt the time drag. The talk and the jokes and the tales were, he admitted honestly, only rare little oases in what was otherwise a desert of intellectual nothingness. And yet, it was but seldom they felt any oppressive sense that time was crawling. The work held them. The days had somewhere to go. Then, one morning, motion came back into the world. The 29th of September, the morning they were to leave Hope Bay at last. The doorway was snowed up solid, as it always was, but this time the cook, whose turn it was, did not bother to dig himself out the ordinary way. He found the weather calm and reasonable, and he simply threw off the temporary roof over the passage and climbed out through the top of the house. On the last morning, he did not use the door. He broke the roof and stepped out into the open air. They marched, and about 10 days out, near a depot they had left, Anderson caught sight of some dark patches on the snow, and in the middle of them, the dear old sack of bread, everything in good order, and he turned his mittens inside out and quietly filled them with a few rusks, little treasures for Deuce and Grunden. And when the two of them came back to the sledge with the best cuts of a seal they had shot, they found Anderson sitting there, silent, unable to say a word. There was too much gravity in the joy he felt to shout or wave. This was a fortune regained, and perhaps their very lives with it. And his two companions, calm and self-controlled as ever, took his silence exactly the wrong way. A man that quiet plainly had bad news. So why put a question you already know the answer to? Until at last he could hold it in no longer, and held out his mittens, and said, "Look here. I have brought you a taste from the bread sack." And their wild, black, filthy faces broke open into gladness. And there was, Anderson wrote, joy and much eating of bread on that eventful day. The day after that, the 11th of October, they lanced the frost blisters on Grunden's foot and Deuce's toe with the sail needle. The one single sail needle they had, the same needle they had built all their shoes with, bound them in dirty bandages, and then went and did geology, because that was who they were. Grunden stayed to rest his foot and dry the bags in the sun. Deuce skied up to finish his map, and Anderson, having climbed for his rock specimens, skied back down what he swore was the finest and longest ski hill of his entire life. A whizzing 300-meter run braked with his poles, a starving, frost-bitten man 9 months into a shipwreck, having the best run of his life. And 25 miles off, that same bright spring, 2 more men were out on the ice on a sledge of their own, Nordenskjöld and Jonasson, working their way along the coast of Vega Island. Jonasson had the depot much on his mind, and Nordenskjöld suspected he knew why. The man was hoping against hope there might be tobacco in it. No one had missed the tobacco more than Jonasson had, and on the strength of that one uncertain prospect, the chance of a pipe, he would cheerfully have staked his life. They were still, on the 5th of November, 3 days from everything, calmly chipping fossils out of Seymour Island, as though there were all the time in the world. 2 sledges. One low spring sun, a little higher and a little longer each day now. One frozen sound between them. And not one of the men on either sledge had the least idea that the other was out there at all, on the same ice, under the same lengthening light, moving. The 12th of October began like the preceding days, with mist. You've been here already, at the very start, the low headland, the men called Cape Dreyfus, the 2 dark shapes on the ice, the trembling hand, the field glass. You've heard Nordenskjöld decide they were penguins and keep walking, and heard Anderson's party on the other side of the same ice mistake his little company for seals standing bolt upright until the cry went up, "It's men! It's men!" You've watched 2 soot-black strangers hold out their hands and say, in the purest English, "How do you do?" And you heard one of them ask, "Don't you know who I am?" and heard the terrible, honest answer, "No." It's not very easy to recognize you. Now, here is the rest of it. The soot-black man looked at his old friend, who did not know him, and gave him the last piece of the riddle. "Oh, I'm Jews," he said, "and this is Gunnar Anderson." And with that, the world snapped back into place. These were no strangers, no lost race of men. These were 2 of his own, Samuel Dews, the artillery lieutenant, and Johan Gunnar Anderson, his own second in command, 2 of the 3 he had never met, the 3 the ship had dropped at Hope Bay to walk to him 11 months before. They had never arrived. He had long since stopped knowing whether they were alive. And here they were, standing on the ice, black from head to foot, so worn and so changed that the man who had waited for them could look straight into their faces and see only savages out of some story. From Anderson's side, it had been just as strange and stranger. He had held out his hand to the man running in front of the dog sledge and said, half forgetting, in the shock of it, what he now looked like, "How do you do, Otto?" And Nordenskjöld had answered him in his calm, friendly way, "Thanks, how are you?" and had not the faintest idea who he was talking to, not until Deuce said the names out loud. 2 men who had shared a ship and a purpose and a whole life, and they stood an arm's length apart on the ice and could not recognize each other. That is what the 2 years had done. That is what it looks like from the outside when the far south wears a man down past the face his friends knew. There were 2 of them here, and there had been 2 who came to meet them, Nordenskjöld and Jonasson, with the dogs. The 3rd of the Hope Bay men was not on the ice at all. Grunden was back at the tent, a little way off, hard at work cooking, with no notion whatever that rescue and reunion were happening a few hundred yards away while he tended the pot. When the dogs bolted at the sight of the two wild men, it was Jonasson, the dog driver, chasing his own team, who reached the tent first, so that the man who actually broke the news to Grunden was not the expedition's leader, but its Norwegian sledger, arriving behind a runaway sledge. And so, the fifth man in that unlikely gathering was welcomed with unfeigned joy, and the little company was, at last, complete. Anderson tried, afterward, to describe what that meeting felt like from the inside, and could only reach for the word joy. A meeting, he wrote, engraved forever in his memory, with a vehement, almost incomprehensible glow of joy. And then he set down the deepest irony in the whole affair, the one that sat under everything. His party, himself, Deuce, Grunden, had originally been landed to walk to Snow Hill and rescue Nordenskjöld's 6. They had set out as the relief expedition. And here, at the end of 11 months, it was they who had been discovered in the most distressed condition of anyone by the very men they had gone to save. The rescuers were the rescued. The 3 who had come to fetch the 6 were, in the end, fetched by them. They gave the headland a new name on the spot. It had been Cape Dreyfus. Now, thanks to what Anderson simply called a wonderful event, they rechristened it Cape Well Met, and that is the name it still carries on the maps to this day. Of all the things that could have marked the great turning of this story, the thing that survives is a place name, 3 words on a chart, at a bend of black rock on Vega Island. Do the count, if you like. The 3 Hope Bay men had been dropped on the ice on the 29th of December and met their friends on the 12th of October, some 9.5 months marooned, 6.5 of those inside the stone hut, saying thank you, and don't mention it, over a vegetable box. And on the far side of the Sound, 6 men in a wooden house had spent that same stretch, measuring the weather for a ship on the sea floor. Now there were 9 of them, together, in the one house at last, and back at Snow Hill, they held as close to a proper banquet as the place could manage, and were, for a little while, simply glad. They traveled back together, and on the 16th of October, the whole party reached the wooden house at Snow Hill. And there, among the others, was Bodman, the meteorologist, who had not been out on the ice for the meeting, and had not yet seen these 2 blackened apparitions up close. So Deuce, who had a sense of humor and could not resist a good thing twice, walked straight up to Bodman and said, in English, with great formality, "How do you do?" And you could watch Bodman's face working, an indescribable astonishment mixed with pure bafflement, cudgeling his brains over this filthy foreigner, addressing him in a foreign tongue, until the slow, careful answer came, "Very well, thank you." And then Deuce clapped him on the shoulder and said, this time in Swedish, "Don't you know me?" And Bodman said, "Why, of course, it's Deuce." The same joke, run twice in a week, on 2 different men, by a man too pleased to be alive to leave it alone. Now, everything was converging, except one thread. Snow Hill and Hope Bay were one household again. But the 20 men on Paulet were still out there on their bare black rock, and no one at Snow Hill knew they existed, and no one on Paulet knew Snow Hill was still inhabited. And the one man who could connect them, the captain, who had put the three ashore at Hope Bay and then watched his ship die 25 miles from Paulet, was about to do the most reckless and necessary thing of the whole 2 years. Larsen and his men had spent the winter climbing the hills of their island, watching the sea for open water. On the 30th of October, the decision was made, and at 5 in the morning, on the 31st, 6 of them pushed off in an open boat, Larsen and 5 others, to row for Snow Hill, to find help or to find out there was none. They took with them 1 ship's biscuit per man per day, and enough of them for 20 days, because Larsen did not know how long it would take, and would rather run out of days than out of bread. 1 biscuit a day, and the open sea, and a boat. The men left behind on Paulet stood on the shore and watched the little boat slip off the ice and out among the floes, and sent long looks after it. And one of them put into a single sentence the thing that had hung over all 3 parties for 2 years, the whole nightmare of the thing distilled. Should that boat be lost out there among the ice, who in all the world was to know that there was a little hut on Paulet Island, where a dozen human beings lived and wondered how help could ever reach them? That was the wager in the boat. Not just 6 men's lives, but the only thread by which anyone might ever learn the rest of them were there at all. It took 9 days, and it nearly killed them several times over. A gale caught them at Rosamel Island and broke the floe away beneath their feet, bit by bit, until their scrap of ice tipped up on end and began to slide them toward water, where the boat would have been crushed like an eggshell. They hung stones on the windward gunwale to keep the wind from throwing the boat into the sea, and slept in their bags to a music Larsen described exactly: the shriek of the penguins, the howl of the storm, and the thunder of the surf 40 feet away. On the second day, working in the bow, breaking a path through new ice for 10 hours on an empty stomach, Larsen's nose began to bleed, and he fainted. The commander of the whole enterprise, face down and unconscious, in the bows of an open boat at the bottom of the world. Luckily, he wrote, the attack soon passed. And, in the middle of all this same starving, half-drowned man went botanizing. Pinned ashore by the storm, he climbed a fell twice, looking for fossils, found none, and gathered mosses and lichens to bring back to Scottsburg, the botanist, a present from a man rowing for his life. He found penguin eggs early and unexpected, and boiled them and gathered a store of them as a gift for whoever might be at the wintering station. And then, somewhere in the first week of November, they came on a small stone hut with a pole beside it, and on the pole a board. And the board said that J.G. Anderson, Juice and Grunden had wintered there. So this is how the captain learned that the 3 men he had set ashore 11 months before were alive, from a note on a stick on an empty shore, with no one there to read it to him. They took one of the trio's roof poles for a mast and rowed on. On the 7th of November, the weather finally broke fair, and they rowed all that day and all that night. On the 8th, stopped by fast ice with their destination almost in reach, they hauled the boat out, slept a few hours, and then, being so near and feeling they had earned it, stood themselves something good, coffee and fish balls. And at 3 o'clock that afternoon, with 12 or 15 miles still between them and the station, all 6 of them climbed out of the boat and set off on foot across rotten snow that let them through to the knee at every second step. The 8th of November, 1903, began, as so many of the days before it had done, with calm, fine weather, and still without any distinguishing features. Hold on to that line. He wrote it himself, and it is almost the same line he wrote for the 12th of October, a day that began like all the others. Twice now, the largest days of these men's lives arrived, wearing the plain grey clothes of every other day. Nothing announced them. That is how it happens, when it happens. It began, in fact, at 5:30 in the morning, and not at Snow Hill, but on Seymour Island, outside a tent where Bodman was sleeping. He was woken by peculiar sounds and a voice, a stranger's voice, out there in the summer half-light, asking after Sobral, asking for the young Argentine by name. Bodman was out of his bag in an instant, and even before he was fully awake, he had worked out the one thing that mattered. These were not the Antarctic's men. Because why on earth would the Antarctic's men arrive, asking first, and by name, for the one Argentine in the party? A country had sent a ship to the bottom of the world to bring home its own boy, and the boy was not even in that tent. Bodman was. Later that morning, at the station, a man put his head in at the door where Nordenskjöld sat, writing. "Come and look," he said. "There are people coming over the ice. I can't make it out. There seem to be 4 of them." And they went out and looked, and they reasoned. It could not be the 2 men away at Seymour, for there were 4. It could not be the dogs, which were lying about the hill. It was much more probable, Nordenskjöld decided, that it was some penguins marching across the ice. Penguins? For the second time in a month, Salvation walked toward him across the ice, and for the second time his mind reached for the birds. And you, who have watched this happen once already, recognize the reflex before he does, the flinch of a man for whom hoping has become too dangerous to do lightly. And then the shapes came clear, and they were men, 4 men, and the men at the station began to guess. "It's certainly Larsen," they said. They thought they knew his steady walk. "Shall we give a cheer?" one asked. "No," said Nordenskjöld. "No, not yet. Let's make sure." And it was not Larsen. It was the Argentine officers, and running out ahead of them, their own cook, young Åkerlund, who could not wait, who wanted the news to reach his friends from a friend. He ran up to them and delivered the whole of it in a single sentence. Rescue and ruin welded together. The best and worst news of 2 years in one breath. There's an Argentine ship out there, but they have heard nothing of the Antarctic. There it is. There is the whole shape of this story, in one line, from a 19-year-old. They were saved. And in the same instant, they understood, with certainty, that the ship and the 20 men aboard her, wherever they were, was almost surely lost. For the second time within a month, Nordenskjöld wrote, they stood at one of those moments when the whole world of the senses dissolves into mist. Had they learned of the ship's loss in any ordinary way, it would have been a crushing blow and nothing else. But to learn it braided together with their own deliverance, and with the crushing responsibility that now fell on them within the hour, it deprived him, he said, of all power of motion. Sorrow was on every face. They were rescued, and no one in that hut got to be simply happy about it. They went out onto the ice and greeted their rescuers, Commodore Irizar, commander of the relief ship Uruguay, and Lieutenant Jalua. These men, Nordenskjöld wrote, who over so many long months had come to think of this ice and these naked rocks as their home and their kingdom, now shaking hands with 2 officers of a foreign navy. And then, being who they were, they brought their guests home and proudly sat them down to what Åkerlund had laid out as a veritable banquet. And Nordenskjöld admitted he had no idea what his rescuers made of it, though the whole spread must have looked, to fresh eyes, distinctly shabby and dirty and smoky. Firelight on gaunt, soot-marked faces, hosting the clean strangers who had come to take them home. And there was a decision now, an unbearable one. Irizar's ship was here. They could load up and go north, to safety, to telegraphs and family and clean beds. But somewhere out on that ice were the men of the Antarctic, who might be alive, who might be dying, who might be waiting on some rock for exactly this ship. To leave was to abandon them. To stay and search was to risk everyone. The weight of that choice, Nordenskjöld said, seemed for the moment to take away all power of thought. And I'll tell you what the ice did with his impossible choice. It took it out of his hands. He never had to decide. Because that night, at 10:30, the decision walked in through the door. He was at his desk. Nobody meant to sleep that night. Each man worked quietly at his own tasks, and Nordenskjöld sat writing a report for the commander of the Swedish relief ship, setting down the little they knew and where the search for the missing men ought to be made. The neighborhood of Hope Bay, he wrote, and Paulet Island, and the Danger Islands. He was writing down where to look for Larsen. And the actual words his pen was in the middle of forming were these: after serious consideration, we have all determined to make use of this opportunity to return. When the dogs began to bark and howl, Bodman went out to sea. Not quickly. He crossed toward the sledge in the yard slowly, on hesitating steps, into the half-gloom of the summer night, for it was, as the men themselves said, a clear, mild night, and still pretty dark, the low, nautical dusk of a summer at that latitude, the kind of not quite dark that only exists in a place where the sun barely leaves. And out there in that gloom, Bodman's eyes went wide, because reality was once again about to overtake everything that hope and imagination together could have pictured. Then the cheering broke out, wild, ear-piercing, and mixed into it the shout the whole house heard and would never forget: Larsen. Larsen is here. Larsen, come out of the sea, out of 9 days in an open boat, out of the dead, walking into a hut at the exact moment its leader was writing down the coordinates of where to search for his body. "He was received," Nordenskjöld said, with glad astonishment, as one risen from the dead. And everyone spoke at once, and told the 6 salt-caked men the thing that could barely be believed. An Argentine ship lay off the island, and they would all be home for Christmas. The captain had brought more than himself. He had carried 18 months of the world's accumulated mail across that ice, and somewhere in it, for Nordenskjöld, was the letter that told him his father had died. The father he had gone to the bottom of the earth, partly to make proud, the man he had saved up 2 years of stories to tell, and would not now be telling them to. That was the bill that came with the miracle. Even Larsen, walking in from the dead, came with a death folded inside it. Of what infinite importance was it, Nordenskjöld wrote afterward, that the 2 parties arrived in the order they did? If the Argentines had come and gone before Larsen reached the hut, the ship might have sailed north, never knowing where the other 19 men were. Instead, a 9-day row in an open boat and a fortnight's voyage by sea had converged, by something no one could have arranged, on the same November evening, and everything, all of it, the death and the loss and the fear, and the 2 grey years, was swallowed up for that one night in the plain fact of the many being saved. On Paulet, nobody knew any of this. On Paulet, they were getting ready for another winter. Understand that. On the 10th of November, while Snow Hill was already 2 days into its rescue, while Larsen was already there, the 19 men in the stone hut on Paulet had no idea the world had changed. They were doing what they had learned to do, which was survive and lay in stores against the winter. It was spring now, and the penguins had come back in their tens of thousands with a never-ending din, and the men were collecting eggs against the coming cold. By the 10th, they had 6,000 of them. 6,000 eggs. Skogsberg, who kept his sense of humor to the very end, noted that he considered himself a temperate man. He never ate more than a score in a single day, though he knew a sailor who managed 3 dozen. And gathering them was warfare. The penguin, he observed, is small, but he is a jolly good fighter, and a man's legs were sore by nightfall. They had even planted an oar in a snowdrift by the hut, with the Swedish colors flying from it. Here, they said, is a piece of Scandinavia that will soon be reunited with the mother country. They were provisioning for a second winter. Not one of them had been told it was over. And that very evening, lying gorged in their bags, one of them had a curious idea and put it to the others. "What," he asked, "would you do if a boat came and began to whistle out there in the sound with none of us expecting it?" What a question! They laughed about it. They agreed they would probably go mad with joy. And then they went to sleep. Just before 4 in the morning, Skogsberg crept out of the hut. A deathly silence lay over everything. The sea was as smooth as a mirror. He looked, out of habit, to the horizon, and there was nothing there. Nothing. And why, he asked himself, should there be anything? He went back indoors with a sigh. And then a sound broke the stillness of the night. a discordant, mechanical sound, a sound he knew perfectly well and that had no business whatsoever being here. He must be dreaming. It came again. It could be nothing else. He was out of his bag, pounding on the sleepers beside him. "Can't you hear it? It's the boat, the boat, the boat." And the hut erupted. Arms flung up into the air. The shouts grew so loud that the penguins woke and joined in the din. The cat lost its mind entirely and ran round and round the walls of the room. And every man fought to be first out the door, so that in a minute they were all out on the hillside, half-dressed and grisly to look at. Out on the ship, Nordenskjöld watched the same moment from the other side. "It is exactly 4 o'clock, he wrote, and the sun's disk begins to show itself above the horizon and clothes the whole scene in a glittering glory. 4 o'clock in the morning, the 11th of November, and the sun coming up. There was never a night down here that swallowed the sun for months. There was only this, the low light, returning, on schedule, to light the strangest morning of their lives." The Uruguay's whistle broke the silence. Once, twice, 3 times, the sound coming back in echoes off the cliffs. Never in his life, Nordenskjöld wrote, had he taken part in a more moving drama. And out of the stone heap on the shore, one man after another came creeping through the low opening, sooty, dirty, emaciated, in tattered clothes, their faces marked by everything they had come through, and beaming, every one of them, with joy. And in the bow of the boat that came for them stood a familiar figure, and it stopped Skogsberg's heart to see it. There was Gunnar Andersson. And there, it was actually Dews himself, standing in the bows. Dews. One of the 3 men waved off at Hope Bay 11 months ago, a man they had every reason to number among the dead, now standing up in the rescue boat, come to save them. Each lost party had been, to the other, a ghost. And here the ghosts were, in the morning light, Carl Andreas, pressing a glass of what he called zoological spirit into Skogsberg's hand, Bodman, with a few bits of sugar saved up for him, Dews, producing a piece of chocolate, and, of all impossible things, a cigarette. It was, Skogsberg wrote, his first banquet after the rescue. Sugar and chocolate and tobacco passed hand to hand across a gunwale by men who a moment before had each believed the others dead. There was grief woven through it, as there always was. Before they left, they set up on the Great Cairn a wooden cross for Wennersgaard, made aboard the ship the day before, and stood in silence around the stone heap where he lay, the place where, once they had gone, the crowds of penguins would be the only watchers left around their comrade's grave. They filled the hut with provisions for a depot, a store for anyone who might ever need it, and it was hard, Skogsberg admitted, not to feel a pang at the thought of what all that food would have meant to them a few months earlier. Then the door was barred. "I have passed over its threshold," he wrote for the last time. And as the island fell away behind the dazzling ice, he found he could not take his eyes off it, and he could not quite name what he felt. He could hardly grieve that their prison doors had been thrown open. And yet, it was with a sadness, a real regret, that he watched Paula disappear, maybe forever. "Has it not," he wrote, been my home. There was still work to do before they could go. The ship called at Hope Bay so that Nordenskjöld could go ashore in threatening weather and rescue the fossils from that stone ruin too. The Jurassic plants they had used for a door frame. And when it was finally finished, the whole enormous thing had a strange, small shape to it. 2 years, Nordenskjöld wrote. 2 years' work in the world of ice, and then 86 hours of almost ceaseless labor that formed so remarkable a conclusion to it. 2 years, ending in 86 hours, Huxley. Then they turned north, toward the world, and the world came back to them, one small thing at a time. The first thing was a flower. Ashore on Staten Island, after 2 years of nothing but ice and lichen and rock, Nordenskjöld caught sight of green grass, and then, peeping out between the stones, a single small flower, a little unimportant flower, he wrote. And yet, what a flood of feeling it called up. A week earlier, ice and snow had been the undisputed rulers of his entire world, and now there was grass and a red barberry blossom, and it was almost impossible to believe. Up the Santa Cruz River, everything ordinary struck them as a marvel. A wide brown river, itself a novelty after 2 years of ice. Houses on the bank, a whole Argentine sheep station, a flock moving over the grass, a rider coming down toward them. How strange it all looked. And then, every field glass on the ship came up at once, because there on the shore, for the first time in 2 years, stood a woman. Grown men who had rowed off floes and buried a comrade in a snowdrift, crowding to a rail to look, through glasses, at the distant fact of an ordinary woman going about an ordinary day. At Santa Cruz, on the 22nd of November, they reached a telegraph, and this was the moment the world found out sideways, garbled, and second-hand. From a wire sent by young Sobral to the newspapers, a report that got the date of the sinking wrong and the numbers wrong and reached Honolulu, of all places, nearly 2 weeks later. The men who had been given up for dead came back into the world's knowledge as a smudged and error-strewn telegram from a boy in Patagonia. And Nordenskjöld, standing on the edge of coming home, was afraid. Not of the ice, he had survived the ice. He was afraid of the verdict. The last news from home was 1.5 years old. Anything might have happened. And more than that, what would the world say of them, of him, of the whole enterprise? They had results, good results, better than he had dared hope for. They had done their duty, but they had also lost the ship and met with real misfortune, and he knew, none better, how that one small word, reverse, has so often made the world forget a man's results and judge him harshly for not having succeeded at everything. He had crossed a continent of ice and rowed men out of the dead, and he sailed toward home, dreading a bad review. Given the debt he had gone into, that fear was also arithmetic. The verdict he feared never came. In the bay off Buenos Aires, the telegrams came aboard. From his mother, word that all was well. From the king, gracious recognition of everything they had done. And though most of the men got no news at all, not one of them received sorrowful news that day, and only once those wires were read could they open their hearts to what was waiting on shore. And what was waiting was a city gone briefly mad with joy. On the 2nd of December, 1903, the Uruguay weighed anchor into a harbor full of vessels dressed in bunting, and the procession behind her, Nordenskjöld wrote, soon numbered more than 40 steamers. On the dockside, they promoted Irizar in front of the whole city. The streets were carpeted with flowers and leaves, some of them, he noticed, magnificent bouquets thrown from the wealthy quarters, and some of them gathered by poor working families out of the public parks. And he said the two were exactly equally dear to him, all the more because they were the first flowers he had seen in years. He knew, and he said so plainly, that most of this vast welcome was really meant for the rescue expedition their own country had sent, and he was heartily glad that it was. The last of it came at home, in Sweden, in a hall in Malmö. He stepped through the door and stopped dead, overwhelmed, because the great hall was filled by an enormous choir, and as he entered they were singing an old song of his own country. I know a land far in the north that lies. And the tears rushed into his eyes. This was his country's greeting, and there could be no dearer one. These first few minutes on Swedish soil, he wrote, were mighty enough to wipe out forever the memory of years of hardship. If someone came to your mind while you listened tonight, a person who loves a story like this one, who would sink into it the way you have, send it to them. That is the whole of the ask, and it is how these quiet stories find the people who need them. A hall full of strangers turned out in the cold for men they had thought were dead. The least we can do for the ones we're fond of is pass along a good thing when we find it. "29 men had been stranded at the bottom of the world. 28 came home. 1 died. That is the whole ledger, and it is worth saying slowly, because it is smaller and quieter than the stories we usually keep. There was no death march. There was no last stand. There were 3 parties who could not reach one another, and 2 years of a sun that would not change, and a wooden ship that went down with her rats still aboard, and 1 young seaman whose heart gave out in a stone hut in the spring. And then there was a rescue, arriving from outside, in the order that spared them the worst of it. Nobody outlasted the sameness. It simply stopped one November morning, because other people came, and the men went back into their lives, and the lives are almost stranger than the ice. Larsen barely paused. 1 year and 5 days after he was carried off Paulet, the captain was back, founding a whaling station on South Georgia, at a harbor called Grytviken, on a site he had quietly picked out while surveying for Nordenskjöld in the very season the world thought him dead. I'm nosed. He had, in a sense, been scouting his own future while everyone else was writing his obituary. He died 20 years later, in the Ross Sea, aboard a ship, still working. At sea, on the ice, to the end. Andersen, Gunnar Andersen, who had recited Dumas by Blubber Light, to keep a sailor company in the dark, went to China, and there he named an entire lost civilization out of the painted pottery of a village called Yangshao, and later stood up in Beijing and announced to the world the discovery of the teeth that became known as Peking Man. Deuce, the artillery officer who carved his own shoes out of a bread barrel and invented grilled penguin, went home and wrote 14 detective novels, and is counted among the very first Swedish crime writers, the great-grandfathers of everything the world now calls Nordic noir. He never did marry an heiress. Grunden made the plan. Deuce got the bill. The bill never came due. And Sobral, the boy who was the price of the coal, the outsider they never quite let all the way in, went to Sweden, to Uppsala, and fell so thoroughly in love with the science he had helped carry through 2 winters that he took a doctorate in geology, the first Argentine ever to do so. He married a Swedish woman and had 9 children with her. The country that had held him a little at arm's length, he married and gave 9 children to. He died in Buenos Aires in 1961 at 81, on the 14th of April, his own birthday, the same date he had once spent turning 22 in a grey hut in the cold. And the paper his own country's geologists later wrote about him carries a title that tells you the shape of his whole life afterward. From the Antarctic ice, it says, to Argentine oblivion. Some of them left no ending at all. The sledger went back to Norway and out of the record. The doctor, the meteorologist, the young cook, they walked back into ordinary life, and the sources simply lose them. No dates, no obituaries, only the winter they came through. And Grunden, Toralf Grunden, who sang while the blubber crackled, who cooked, who shot the seal on the day the food ran out, who was frying meat when the rescue came, and who is the reason 2 more famous men lived to become famous. Grunden got a rock. There is a 15-meter rock near the mouth of Hope Bay that carries his name, and that is all history gave him. The least documented man of the whole party is the one man whose actual voice is preserved forever in the book. In 2 small words, he said, after every meal in a stone hut for 6 months, "Don't mention it." As for Otto, he spent something like the next 15 years publishing the science, volume after volume, the fullest record any expedition of that age produced, the thing he had gone down there to make. His program, as he had promised, was carried out to the full. And it left him deep in debt, the private loans still owed, so that the true ending is not, he came home a hero, but he came home a hero, and spent 15 years paying for it. The wrong island, the one he had rounded and coasted past and built his house across the water from, gave him, in the end, a gift with his name on it, a 6-foot fossil penguin out of those very bones the doctor had turned over in the lamplight and pronounced a bird. They called it, in Latin, Nordenskjöld's giant penguin. He founded a business school, and he grew old in Gothenburg. And in the summer of 1928, in a street in his own university town, a man who had survived 22 months on the Weddell Sea ice, a near fall into a crevasse, and a winter no one was coming to end, was struck by a vehicle and died 2 days later, at 58. It is not a famous story. And when you set it beside Shackleton, whose ship was crushed in the very same sea 12 years later, you can see why. Nobody here died dramatically. The men were rescued by foreigners in languages the great adventure books were never written in. And the rescue was not a rescue they made themselves. Somebody else's navy came for them, which makes it better history and worse legend. Shackleton, when his own ship went down in that sea, had Paulet Island on his list of places to run for, precisely because he knew Larsen's men had left a depot there. The forgotten expedition was the rehearsal for the famous one. It came first, and it came home in better order, and almost no one remembers its name. The hut is still standing. The little prefabricated wooden house they carried in pieces to the bottom of the world and bolted to the rock. It is there yet, on Snow Hill Island, more than 120 years on, kept whole all this time by the same dry, patient cold that so nearly hollowed the men out inside it. It is a museum now, with their own things still in it, tended between the two countries whose story it holds. And the cold that preserved it for a century is now, at last, beginning to let go, the ground softening, the thaw working at it, so that the thing the ice kept, the ice is slowly starting to give back. And out on Paulet, on the high point of that bare black island, the cairn is still there too. The men built it to be seen, a tower of stones carried up the slope, raised so that a ship, if a ship ever came, might catch sight of it and know that someone was there. The ship came, and the cairn is still standing, still being seen by the people who make the long voyage now, on purpose, just to look at it. Among 100,000 penguins on a shore where 20 men once wintered and 19 walked away. Here is where I leave them. The men are gone now, all of them, the ones who got a culture and a genre and a warship named after them, and the ones the record simply misplaced. But the room is still there. The little house stands empty on its island, the way it stood full, and the low sun still comes up over it for its 4 short hours and slides back down, exactly as it did on every one of those 700 mornings, changing nothing, asking nothing. Somewhere out on the black rock, the penguins keep their watch over a grave and a pile of stones. And the ice holds what it has always held, quietly, for as long as it is let. You have spent a little while in a room that never changed. You can come out of it now. Sleep well. Since you made it this far, I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. If you would like to continue listening to episodes with similar themes, I linked them in the description below. You will also find a playlist of our most popular videos. Sleep now, nightlings. And wake up, as always, a little stronger and a little wiser. The story is done, but yours continues.